Uchi Austin is a restaurant that's been around since 2003. Predominantly, it's a sushi restaurant, and it's expanded. I think there's restaurants now in Miami as well. Charlotte, Dallas, Denver, Houston, Miami, Philly, Scottsdale, Westwood, Nashville coming soon. This is the original in downtown Austin. So we're going to go and look at their wine list today. Knowing kind of what their food menu is, right? Mostly sushi. I would want to drink champagne, sparkling wine, light-bodied whites, sake. I tend to lean towards Junmai Daigenjo, so kind of like the cleanest, purest form of sake. But I also, knowing what the American public is looking for in sake, you want to see a nice variety of different styles, right? You want a Junmai, you want a Junmai Genjo, you want a Junmai Daigenjo, you want to have a Nigori, you might want to have a sparkling sake. And it showed that they have all of those kind of different styles. My one takeaway immediately is this restaurant, across all of its categories, has a lot of by the glass options. In sake, they have over almost 15, almost 20. Whoa. Yeah, they might have 20 by the glass. And that's a lot. I've operated Japanese restaurants where I've had maybe 3 sake by the glass. But if there's a market for it, great. The other thing that I would say is they have some pricing disparity. They have some stuff on the lower end, and then they have a glass of Junmai Daigenjo for almost $40 a glass.
I also noticed that they had a lot of wine by the glass options, Pat. Like I think there's 10 or 12 whites by the glass.
Yeah.
Right? And I think 2 things on that front. So one, having a lot of wines by the glass is a positive thing in that it can lend to a lot of discovery from guests. You can offer a lot of unique varietals, a lot of brand recognition. You can offer some of everything. And that can really help guests discover new things. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
However, operationally, offering this many wines by the glass leads to a huge challenge, and that is waste and spoilage. So it's this push and pull. It's nice to have this many things. It's also really challenging to manage that operationally and to make sure things are served fresh and correctly.
Right. So, for instance, in the sparkling by the glass, you have a $13.50 glass of wine, a $14 glass of wine, a $15 glass of wine, and a $30 glass of wine. You could probably only have 3. You could have one that's $14 or $15. You could have one that's like high teens, low 20s, and then you have that $30 glass of wine as well. They have some good price steps here for sparkling by the bottle. They have another half bottle of champagne from Laurent Perrier. That's $32 a glass if you split it in half. There's some steps, but you'd also kind of want to see some more pricing disparity. You have 2 things that are flatlined at $225. You have a $475 and a $480. You could make your Crude Grand Cuvée $395, $375, and then you could also make one of these $200 or $250 to kind of build some of those steps.
Also, going back to that, just my quick note on sparkling, being a stickler for the details, if you go to the bottom, like Tatunjay, the Comte, there's no vintage there. That's a vintage champagne. If you're spending $475 on a bottle of wine, you want to know the vintage of that.
Right. Some people might be a stickler on the cuvee of the Grand Cuvée, but that's really a multi-vintage wine. White by the bottle. Domaine Leflaive, I'm guessing this is going to be a Grand Cru wine, but there's no descriptor of the name. These wines range from lightest to fuller bodied based on how there's an American Chardonnay kind of split between some fancy Burgundy, but then Chocolina's kind of here in the middle at 105. It's not organized by price. So here's an Assyrtiko for 145. But hey, there's a good range of prices. On the high end, things could be a bit lower, depending on this Leflaive Clavaillon from 2022. Is that selling at $10.50? If it is, great. But, that wine also could be $8.95 or $9.50 on the wine list.
And you're still making $400 or $500 in profit.
Right.
On that one transaction.
But there's a good selection of different options and different kinds of wine. There's American Sauvignon Blanc, which I think would play in Austin, Texas. There are reach wines that are affordable, like a Sylvaner and a Pinot Blanc from Alsace. There's Domaine Huet. This is a wine I always look for in terms of value on a wine list because the winemaking is great. They're very food friendly, but they're kind of a hard sell. So this is like for $110 is a great deal. They have a higher end Sauvignon Blanc from Ashes and Diamonds on the American side. And then they have a nice collection of Domaine Leflevre and some California Chardonnay. The one thing that's missing on here is a higher end American Chardonnay, if that's Kistler or Aubert or Costa Brown, that would probably be on the wine list anywhere between $150 to $300.
My only note about the white wine selections is just to piggyback off of what you said about the Acertico.
Yeah.
And the Chacolina, right? Both of those selections are above $100. And for most markets, that's an expensive bottle of wine. And those are examples of two wines that are not well known, what we would call a hand sell. Somebody who's passionate about it, really likes them, kind of gets behind them on the floor and waxes poetic to a guest about it and sells it. But at that price point, it's going to make exposing people to that wine a little bit harder because you're casting a smaller net based on the price. So I'd really love to see those two things be less. And there are great examples of like affordable Acertico and affordable Chacolina in every market. It's just about picking one that's really good where the cost is lower and therefore you can put it on your wine list for $60, $70, $80 and make it a little bit more approachable.
Okay, so here they have 3 to 4 wines by the glass for rosé. You're in Texas, so you're kind of in red wine country. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reds by the glass. Again, just a lot of wines by the glass, right? A lot of $14 to $35. There's some steps, but then there's some also repetitive. There's value, but you only need to lead with a couple things of value. You don't need to have 5 things under $16 a glass. And then,
And Pat, your comment about Texas,
Yeah.
so Texas being red wine country. So this is a sushi restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it makes sense to have 10 reds by the glass in a sushi restaurant?
Probably not.
But being in Texas, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. But here's a great example. And like for me, your by the glass should just be good enough for somebody to get a glass of something and they're going to be really happy with it. But it also should lead people to buy a bottle of something.
So what you're saying is when you offer something for everyone on your wines by the glass, you might be shooting yourself in the foot on your wine by the bottle offering. Exactly. Or on the movement of your wines by the bottle.
Exactly. So, and here's a great example. You have an $18 Cabernet from Washington. You have a $26 Cabernet from Napa. You also have a $35 Cabernet from Napa. You probably could run with one Cabernet that is in between $20 and $25 from California, and guests would be super happy because I bet you're selling a lot of this green wig for $18, not because it's the best, but it's because it's the cheapest. And so you're not really selling these other 2 higher premium ones. Bottles of red wine. They have some fancy stuff, pretty well priced, could be lower. And then they have some big red wines that again would be indicative of California. Again, there could just be some small tweaks on pricing. How much Opus 1 are you selling for $850? Would you sell more of it if it was $595 and you could buy a bunch of it from the distributor? Canis for $455, the special select, that's a recognizable wine. Could you sell more of it at $375? DRC for $2,000 for Corton, $4,000 for RSV, $5,400 for RSV from 2 different vintages. Those wines could be cheaper. You're missing a more economical red Burgundy. Not everyone is going to go and drink DRC, but there's going to be people that would drink Dujac Parenfie. There's people that would drink Meunier. There's people that would drink Faivelay. Anywhere between $200 to $500 a bottle, and that might be a nice step into red Burgundy.
And also, red Burgundy is interesting because it's very appropriate with that cuisine. There's a lot of food that I'm sure comes out of the kitchen that's red Burgundy appropriate.
Right. So overall, this is a good list. There's a nice collection of wine. Some of the pricing can be a little bit tightened up. Some of the curation could be adjusted.
I agree. I mean, the list overall, it's lacking in the middle. There's a bunch of gateways. There's a bunch of affordability on here. There's a bunch of fancy wine. lots of high-end things, options, like you mentioned, DRC, Opus One, Sassicaia, Lefleve, Grand Cru, stuff like that. But there seems to be a gap in the middle in that 2 to 350 range, or even 175 to 350 range. Just some recognizable options there. You mentioned domestic Chardonnay earlier, Pat. Having a Kistler, a Koenigsgaard, Aubert, that would really sort of round out the list and balance it a little bit more. But overall, the brands are compelling. It's a well-curated list.
Yeah, and based on their by the glass selection, their list placements, they're thinking about doing business with the right people to get allocations, right? They have Tattinger, they have Piarlo, they have Pierre Spar.
So which is co-brand.
And Wilson
Daniels.
Yeah,
right.
they have the sorting table and Vineyard brand. So like they're thinking about pulling the right levers to get these things. You know, the other aspects is that, hey, it's great to get these things, but can you sell them?
There's too much entry level and too much high end, and there's not enough in the middle. That's in fact one point, right? And that point is balance. So, you know, what I would do if I were curating this list is I would reduce prices on some of the high end, potentially even eliminate some of the high end. I would raise prices on the low end, potentially reduce the number of selections on the low end, and I would populate a little bit more in the middle. And I would think about it like a bell curve in terms of percentages, right? 25% of my list should be below $100. 50% of my list should be between 100 and 300. And then the remaining 25% of the list should be above 300. And now you're structuring a wine list that gives people, the most amount of people, the most options. Very few people are going to come in there and drink DRC for $2,000, $4,000, $5,400 a bottle. Equally, less people, a lot of people, but less people are going to come in and drink $55 or $60 bottles of wine. The list should be engineered in that like 80 to 120 sweet spot.